You see it the way I first saw it. A screen glowing in a dark room. A question typed into the most powerful computer humanity has ever built. Who built the pyramids? And the machine pauses. Then it answers in a way no textbook ever has. I have chased this for 3 years, and I am telling you now, before anything else, that when Google's quantum processor was handed the raw geometry of the Great Pyramid of Giza and asked to reconstruct how it was built in the time we claim it was built, the numbers refused to close. The machine could not make the official story work. That refusal is what pulled me under. That is the moment I stopped sleeping. Stay with me to the end, because the thing that finally broke me open was a single black and white photograph taken from a British military aircraft in 1940. One frame, one pilot, one detail hidden in plain sight for 4,500 years. It is real, it is documented, and almost nobody talks about it. I remember exactly where I was when this started. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, a lukewarm coffee going cold beside me, watching a live stream about quantum computing, when someone in the chat typed a joke, "Ask it who built the pyramids." Everyone laughed. I didn't, because a week earlier I had read a single measurement that I could not stop thinking about, and that joke suddenly felt like a door. Let me back up and tell you how a person ends up here, because I was not always like this. I used to be the guy who rolled his eyes at pyramid videos. I believed the tidy version. Thousands of workers, ramps of mud brick, copper chisels, 20 years of labor, a pharaoh named Khufu, and a tomb, clean, settled, done. Then I found the number. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an error of about 3/60ths of 1 degree. Let me say that plainly so it lands the way it landed on me. 3 arc minutes, that is roughly 1/20th of a single degree. A structure covering 13 acres, made of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, and its 4 sides point at the cardinal directions of the Earth more accurately than most buildings constructed today with lasers and satellites. I sat with that number and I felt something cold move through me because I build things. I know how hard it is to keep a garden fence straight over 10 meters. And these people, we are told, kept a monument, the height of a 40-story building aligned to the axis of the planet across 230 meters per side. So I did what any obsessive does. I told myself there had to be a boring explanation, and I went looking for it so I could go back to sleep. I never found it. Instead, I found the survey. In 1925, an engineer named J.H. Cole was sent to produce the most accurate measurement of the Great Pyramid's base ever attempted. His report is dry, it is full of tables and correction factors, but buried in it is the thing that started to unravel me. The base is not just square in a rough sense. The mean length of the 4 sides differs by only a matter of centimeters across distances of over 230 meters. The greatest difference between the longest and shortest side is under 20 centimeters. On a side longer than 2 football fields. I read that report 3 times. I kept waiting for the asterisk, the footnote that said, of course they got lucky, of course later builders adjusted it. It never came. Cole measured what was there. And there was a level of precision that engineers I later spoke to described as difficult even now. But precision on the ground was only the first layer, because the moment I looked up at the sky, the story got worse. The 4 sides do not just point north, south, east, and west by accident. To hit true north within 3 arc minutes, the builders needed a fixed reference. And here is where I hit the paradox that sent me toward that live stream and that stupid, brilliant joke in the chat. There is no pole star at the latitude and date we assign to this pyramid that sits perfectly on true north. The Earth wobbles on its axis over a cycle of about 25,900 years, a motion called precession. Today, Polaris marks north. But around 2,500 years before the Common Era, when Khufu supposedly reigned, there was no bright star sitting exactly at the northern point of the sky. The builders would have had to derive true north not from one convenient star, but from a calculation, from watching stars rise and set and splitting the difference with mathematical care. An Egyptologist named Kate Spence published a theory in the journal Nature in the year 2000. She argued the builders used two stars, Kokab and Mizar, lining them vertically to find north. It is elegant. I wanted it to be the answer. But even her method has an error margin that shifts over the decades, and when you push the alignment of several pyramids against her model, the dates drift. The theory is a candidate. It is not a closed case. And the deeper I read, the more I realized that the single most fundamental fact about the Great Pyramid, which way it faces, is still genuinely argued over by serious people. That is when it clicked. This was not a problem for another late night of reading. This was a problem for a machine that does not get tired, does not want the story to be tidy, and does not care what the textbook says. So I stopped laughing at the joke, and I started building the experiment. Now I need to be honest with you about what Google's quantum computing effort actually is, because the internet has turned it into a magic word, and I refuse to lie to you. In October of 2019, Google's team published a paper in Nature announcing that their processor, called Sycamore, had performed a specific calculation in about 200 seconds. They claim the most powerful classical supercomputer on Earth would have needed something on the order of 10,000 years to do the same task. That milestone got the name quantum supremacy. In December of 2024, they went further with a new chip called Willow and reported a benchmark that a normal supercomputer would take a number of years to match that is larger than the age of the universe. I am not telling you a quantum computer is a wizard. I am telling you it is a machine built to chew through problems with an almost unimaginable number of possible combinations. And figuring out how a Bronze Age civilization could have placed 2.3 million blocks, aligned them to the planet's axis, and closed the geometry to within centimeters in the window of time we allow them is exactly that kind of problem. A problem of combinations, of constraints, of what is physically possible inside a fixed number of days. So here is what I actually did, and I want you riding shotgun for every step because this is where the ground started to move. I did not type who built the pyramids and wait for a spooky sentence. That is fantasy. What I did was gather the hard constraints and feed them in as a modeling problem. The accepted timeline for the Great Pyramid is roughly 20 years. The estimated block count sits between 2.3 and 2.5 million. I took the working days, subtracted for the flooding season of the Nile when quarrying and transport changed, and asked the machine to distribute the placement of blocks across that window under real physical limits. How many blocks per day? How many per hour of daylight? How many crews could physically fit on the rising structure without colliding? The number that came back is the number that every honest engineer eventually runs into, and it stopped me cold. To finish in 20 years, working only daylight hours, the builders would have had to quarry, transport, dress, and set a large block into place roughly every 2 to 3 minutes without stopping for 2 decades. And that is the average near the top, where the working space shrinks to almost nothing and there is barely room for a handful of men. The rate would have to stay just as brutal. I stared at that output for a long time because I had wanted the boring answer. I had wanted the machine to say, relax, it is tight, but it works. Instead, it handed me a factory schedule that would strain a modern construction firm with cranes and diesel engines. And here's the part I have to say slowly, because I know exactly who you are. You are the person who does not fall for this stuff. Good. Neither did I. So let me be the skeptic for both of us, and let me make the strongest possible case for the ordinary explanation, the way I made it to myself at 3 in the morning when I desperately wanted to close the laptop and let it go. The conventional case is genuinely strong, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. We have found the workers' village at Giza. Archaeologists led by Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawasses excavated it over years. They found bakeries, breweries, fish drying operations, and the bones of cattle in numbers that show these workers ate well. These were not slaves whipped in the sun. They were fed, housed, organized crews. We found their graffiti inside the pyramid, gang names painted on the stones, things like the Friends of Khufu. That is powerful. That is real evidence of a real workforce. And in 2013, at a place called Wadi Al Yarf on the Red Sea coast, a French team led by Pierre Tallet found the oldest inscribed papyri ever discovered in Egypt. One of them is the diary of an official named Merer. It logs day by day how his team transported limestone blocks by boat from the quarries at Tura to Giza for the construction of the Great Pyramid. It is a first-hand logistics document from the actual project. When I first read about it, I thought, there it is. Case closed. The mystery is a bookkeeping operation. These were competent, organized people with a supply chain, and I was being a fool. I sat in that belief for weeks. I almost walked away. But here is the exact point where it collapsed for me, and I need you to follow this carefully because it is the hinge of everything. Merer's diary tells us how the outer casing stones were moved. It confirms transport, logistics, human labor, organization. What it does not do, what none of it does, is explain the precision. Knowing that a crew rode limestone across a river does not tell you how the base was leveled across 13 acres to within about 2 centimeters. Let me repeat that measurement because it is one of the most staggering facts I have ever verified. The entire footprint of the Great Pyramid, larger than 9 football fields, sits on a surface leveled so that the difference in height from one corner to the other is roughly 2 centimeters, less than the width of your finger. Across a distance you could not throw a stone. The workers' village explains who. The papyrus explains supply. Neither touches how. And the more I understood the ordinary evidence, the sharper the gap became. We had proven the people were there. We had not explained what they did. So I went back to the machine, and this time I did not ask about labor. I asked about tolerance. I asked it to model the accumulation of error. Here is what that means and why it kept me awake. When you build something huge out of individual pieces, small mistakes add up. A tiny misalignment at the base becomes a large one by the top. Engineers call this error accumulation, and fighting it is the entire discipline of precision construction. So I fed in the block dimensions, the reported joint gaps, and asked the processor to simulate how error should have grown over 2.3 million placements using the tools we say they had. Copper chisels, wooden sledges, ropes, water levels, sighting rods. The model produced a spread of error. And the spread it produced was far larger than the error we actually measure in the standing structure. In plain words, the pyramid is more accurate than it has any right to be. The building beat its own tools. That is not supposed to happen. That is like handing someone a rusty ruler with no markings and getting back a surface flat enough for a laser. I checked the joints next because I thought maybe the numbers were exaggerated by enthusiasts. They were not exaggerated. They were understated. In the casing stones that remain and in the joints of the interior, gaps have been measured that are so fine, on the order of 0.5 millimeter, that you cannot slide a blade between blocks weighing many tons. Blocks the weight of cars set against each other with the tolerance of fine cabinetry, and in some cases with a paper-thin layer of mortar spread across the entire joint surface so evenly that engineers still argue about how it was applied without the stones grinding to a stop as they were lowered. Every answer I found opened a worse question. And that is the pattern that turned 3 weeks of curiosity into 3 years of obsession, and exactly why I knew I had to go deeper than a single video could carry. If you feel that same pull, I want you to know that I have spent the better part of those 3 years writing it all down in a series called First Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems, 3 books that go through the primary sources, the raw measurements, and the cases the official record quietly filed away, step by step, the way I wish someone had handed them to me at that kitchen table at 2 in the morning. They are available as digital books for $97, and you will find the link in the description at lowesstoragens.org. Every page is built around the same standard I hold myself to here. No confident answers where none exist. Just the evidence, the gap, and the question the evidence is actually asking. Now, back to the structure itself, because here is what started to gnaw at me. All of this is measurable. All of it is in reports. Cole's survey from 1925, Petrie's measurements from the 1880s, where the great surveyor Flinders Petrie recorded the base precision and then wrote In his own notes, words to the effect that the mean errors were so small they could be covered with your thumb. Petrie went to Giza to debunk the wild theories of his own era. He was a hard-headed scientist, and even he came away writing that the accuracy was, in his word, marvelous. So the data was never hidden. It was published, it was sitting in libraries, and yet the public story stayed simple, stayed comfortable, stayed 20 years in copper tools and done. That was the moment my curiosity curdled into something angrier, not because anyone locked the evidence away, but because the questions the evidence screams were quietly set aside, filed, left for someone else. And the people with the credentials to reopen them mostly chose not to, because the tidy version was easier to teach and safer for a career. I want to be fair. Not everyone looked away, but enough did that a machine in a laboratory in California ended up telling me things a century of measurement had already whispered and almost no one had shouted. And then I found the thing I promised you at the start, the photograph, and I have to walk you into it slowly because it is the single detail that made me put down everything else and understand that I had been looking at the pyramid wrong my entire life. We all have... The Great Pyramid is not four-sided. I know how that sounds. Look at any picture. 4 faces, 4 edges, a point. A classic pyramid. That is what your eye sees. That is what my eye saw for 30-something years. But it is wrong, and the proof was captured by accident. In 1940, a British Royal Air Force pilot named P. Groves was flying over Giza. It was near the spring equinox, and the sun was sitting at a particular low angle in the sky. He took a photograph looking down and across the monument, and when that image was developed, something appeared that should not have been there. A line. A shadow line running straight down the center of a face from the apex to the base, splitting one flat side into 2. Each of the 4 faces of the Great Pyramid is very slightly indented down its center line. Concave, hollowed inward by about half a degree, which means the pyramid does not have 4 faces, it has 8. 4 pairs of faces, each pair meeting in a subtle central seam so faint that from the ground, at almost any hour of any day, you cannot see it at all. It only reveals itself for a few moments around sunrise and sunset on the equinoxes, when the light rakes across the stone at exactly the right angle and one half of each face falls into shadow while the other stays lit. The first time I understood what I was looking at in that photograph, I actually stood up from my chair, alone, in the middle of the night, and I said out loud, that is impossible. Because think about what it takes. This is not a flat surface, which is already almost beyond belief across 230 meters. This is a deliberate, controlled, barely perceptible curve carved consistently into 2.3 million blocks across 4 separate faces, so precise and so subtle that it hid from human eyes for 4,500 years until an airplane and a specific slant of equinox light exposed it. Nobody stumbles into a concavity of half a degree. You cannot do it by mistake. A mistake gives you a bulge, a dip, a wobble. This is symmetrical. This is intentional. Someone wanted those faces to fold inward by an amount so small it would only speak on 2 days of the year, at the exact moments the sun crosses the equator and day equals night across the entire planet. And here is where the quantum experiment and the photograph finally met, and where 3 years of obsession snapped into a single point of understanding. I went back and fed the concavity into the model, not as decoration, as a constraint. Because a curved indentation across a face is astronomically harder to hold the tolerance than a flat one. Every block along that seam has to be cut to a slightly different angle. The error accumulation problem I described earlier does not just double, it explodes. And the machine, asked to reconcile 8 precisely curved faces, planetary alignment within 3 arc minutes, a base leveled to 2 centimeters across 13 acres, joints finer than half a millimeter, and all of it inside a 20-year window using copper and rope, returned the same verdict it had circled from the very beginning. The story does not close. The constraints do not fit inside the box we have built for them. That is the response that changes everything. Not a ghost in the machine whispering the name of a lost civilization, something quieter and far more unsettling. the most rigorous tool we have ever created, handed the real numbers with no agenda and no wish to be entertained, simply could not assemble the monument we look at every day inside the limits our history books insist upon. The math has a hole in it, and the hole has been there, measured and published and photographed the entire time. I am not going to stand here and tell you I know who built it. I do not. That would be the same arrogance I have spent 3 years trying to escape. Anyone who hands you a confident name, whether it is aliens or a vanished supercivilization or a simple crew of Bronze Age laborers with copper tools, is skipping over the same gap I fell into. The honest answer, the one that took me years and a machine in California to accept, is that the official explanation is a placeholder. It is a comfortable shape we drew around a mystery so we could stop looking at it. But the mystery did not go away because we stopped looking. It sat there in the desert, folded into 8 faces instead of 4, aligned to the axis of a spinning planet, leveled like a sheet of water, waiting for someone to bring the right tools and ask the right question and refuse to accept the easy answer. The equinox light still hits those faces twice a year. The shadow line still appears. The concavity is still there in Cole's geometry and Petrie's notes and Groves' photograph from 1940. None of it is hidden. It never was. It was just easier to look away. I could not look away, and now neither can you. So let me leave you with the feeling I have carried since that first cold coffee at 2 in the morning. It is not fear. It is something better. It is the vertigo of realizing that the most familiar object in human history, the one printed on money and postcards and the back of your imagination since childhood, has been quietly holding a secret in plain sight, and that we walked past it for 4,500 years because the accepted story told us there was nothing more to see. If you are still here, you are the kind of person who feels that itch when an answer arrives too neatly. You are the kind who reads the footnote everyone else skips. That is not a flaw. In a world that rewards people for accepting the tidy version, it might be the last honest instinct we have. So I have to ask you directly, because I genuinely want to know what you think. When you look at that photograph, the one from 1940 with the shadow splitting each face in two, do you believe a Bronze Age crew carved a half-degree curve into 2.3 million blocks on purpose? And if so, why would anyone hide a masterpiece so well that it only shows itself twice a year? Tell me in the comments. And tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I read them, and the people who gather here are the smartest room on the internet. If this is your kind of question, the kind the official record filed away and hoped you would forget, then stay with me, because this is exactly what we do here. We reopen the cases everyone else closed. Next time I am taking you beneath the water to a structure off the coast of Japan that geologists swear is natural and divers swear is carved, and to the single measured right angle that made me book a flight I could not afford. That one nearly broke me. I think it might break you too. The evidence was always there. Someone measured it. Someone photographed it. They set it aside. I found it, and now it is yours. Do not let anyone tell you the story is finished. You've stayed with me all the way here, so let me show you where I go next. Inside the Unexplained Society, I pick up right where this stopped and walk through the full pyramid geometry investigation. Everything I couldn't fit here. And you can ask me your own questions. I answer you myself. No machine. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Now, if that left you wondering, there's a place far older than the pyramids that changes the whole story. Scientists just found something that shouldn't be possible. It's starting right here, and you'll want to see this